Welcome back to the 27. This is a setup analysis for the old stock car, specifically a racified version of the 1976 Chevrolet Opala, which is a series that is featured in Brazil to this day, one of the hidden gems you can find in AMS2. Well, maybe I shouldn't say gem, as a car like this certainly is sort of an eye of the beholder kind of thing. It does have its fans like Mark C. and Stu M. who suggested I give it a try. I'm noticing a trend with car setup requests lately, and I'm beginning to think that it's not necessarily the setup you guys are looking for, but for the entertainment value of seeing me struggle with these things. So for the Opala, I'm setting down my precision tools and picking up a hammer and some duct tape, and the plan is to bash this thing into racing shape. One of the interesting things about getting into the Brazilian-based racing scene is although produced by Chevrolet, this car was only made available to the South American market, and it's considered one of the most popular cars ever to be produced for Brazil, with over 1 million units sold. With that kind of popularity, of course it's going to wind up on a track somewhere. In Brazil, they'll drive this thing at Interlagos. Why the hell not? Now, there are two versions of this car in AMS2, a 1979 version with 185 horsepower. Then there's this one, which is based on the same model year but featuring an upgraded inline 6 with 297 horsepower. Again, why the hell not? This car's been racing in Brazil since 2014 as a sort of resurrection to the good old days, but faster. For us, it's tough to describe how to drive this thing, as it took me some time to get used to it. Try imagining driving a bus on stilts. If you had a bobblehead doll glued to the dash, it would snap. This thing's a handful, but why? Well, it's extremely top heavy with some extremely soft springs. Simply turning the wheel at any sort of speed can be an adventure. You're going to find yourself sort of managing the roll of this thing. But it also has an open differential, so anytime you apply the throttle while it's rolling around a corner, there is a good chance it will light up the inside rear tire and bog down your momentum. So what do you do? Well, the best way I could come up with was to not try and fight it, to not try to fight what it is. It's not going to turn into a GT3 with a few clicks, so instead I try to embrace it. My first approach was, believe it or not, soften the springs. It's a good way to keep the rear tires on the tarmac and the power down with an open differential. Then I balanced the stiffness of the car using the ARBs. I wanted it to turn in naturally a little bit easier. Finally, I calmed the whole thing down with a stiffer damping package to try to help mitigate the pitch and roll inertia of a car like this with an extremely high center of gravity. But that wasn't the end of the story with the Opala. You see, whoever decided to race this car put the engine in, increasing the horsepower by 50%, but they paid zero attention to the brakes. Who cares about brakes when you're trying to go fast, right? Well, in the Opala's case, after lap 3, the brakes were pretty much on fire, and you could literally feel them just giving up. Your braking zones will be getting progressively longer and longer. So I moved the brake bias backwards to take the strain off the fronts as much as possible without snapping the car. I also reduced the pressures quite a bit. This may not help initial braking on lap 1 and 2, but it definitely helped the brake temperatures and also calmed down the pitch and roll inertia significantly, allowing for more forgiving speed adjustments. A lot about this car is about the brakes, so for your brake foot I suggest putting on a soft slipper. Think something as pink and as fluffy as possible. So let's take a look at the telemetry. Alright, so here we are with racing sim tools, and it feels kind of silly to go over telemetry with a car like this, but I think it's still kind of interesting and novel to see the extremes of what cars can do. First, take a look at the top left here. We have 3 laps registered with defaults and 3 laps registered with the custom package. I was ultimately faster with the custom, but not by much, maybe 2/10 the fastest lap, but I think overall, I was more consistent by about 5 seconds over the 3 lap stint, and I'm not really sandbagging this, guys. This is for real. I do try and give it my all with the default builds, so we have a fair test. So the first thing I wanted to point out was the lateral stiffness distribution. Here we are in the suspension tab, and you can take a look. This is actually kind of funny. The package is so understeery that's sort of off the charts in a lot of places. And what I mentioned before was I wanted the car to have, a little bit more turn in while cornering. So I'm going to take a look at the custom package. As you can see, I tamed it down a lot more, but you can see that also that it's a lot more. If you look at these arcs, that's sort of telling me that it turns in really well in the beginning, and then it kind of fades off, and then on the end it might have a little bit more oversteer. So kind of like an oversteer tendency on turn in, an understeer mid corner, and then an oversteer. There's nothing you can do with that. This car is so high off the ground with its center of gravity. Let's take a look at the run tab really quickly. I want to show you how I pressured and cambered the tires. This is the default package after all 3 laps, and you can see that there was barely any camber on the front, and the tires were, I guess you could say, on the marginal higher pressure side of things, and with no look like it's going to calm down. So the pressures were just going up. So what I did was I rebalanced the pressuring to bring it back under in reason, and then also I did some work to try to camber the tires a little bit better so you can get some more traction when cornering. The other thing I wanted to show you was the wear. With the default package, it looks like the rear left was getting out of control, and that's the opening differential in action. In Imola, that's the inside, that's the left rear. So when you're doing all of those sharp corners, the differential's just opening up and just spinning and just wrecking the tire. So we try to bring that under control. As you can see, I balanced out the rears a little bit. That's what that soft rear package helps do. The next thing I want to show you, which is interesting about the differential, I'm not going to show you the differential tab, which is all the bars and graphs that I usually do. I'm going to take a look at the track graph. And here, I love the track graph. This is something that helps me really take an overall picture of what the differential is doing instead of just looking at bars. It helps visualize it. And you can see all these places where it's yellow to orange. That means it's 5% unlocked, a little bit more. But when it gets into the red territory, that means the differential is practically pretty much unlocked. And so you can see with the open differential how much unlocking is going on during the course of the lap. And I'm not using this to distinguish the defaults at all. This is just what the differential does. Finally, I did mention the brakes, so I want to point that out to you too as well. Let's go to the brakes tab, select a lap, and you can see here that the brake temperatures for the fronts were peaking. Wow, they're getting over 650 degrees on the fronts and over 400 degrees on the rears, which is actually pretty bad. Now I can't really distinguish the custom package with the default because this was prior to a lot of my brake work, but I did do some brake work, and the thing that I wanted to point out to you the most was the change in the brake bias. When you have your brakes set appropriately, the brake bias is going to remain consistent. So you can see here that it's consistent based on the effectiveness of the brake pads at the temperature that they're at. You can see here we're at around 62.5% of brake bias just from the temperature of the brakes, and that has nothing to do with the setup page. This is based on the temperatures. And if you look at the default package, you can see that it's about 2% rearwards. So you might want to be like, oh, I feel like it's the back end snapping out, let's move the brake bias forwards. No, you don't want to do that. You want to adjust the temperatures of your brake pads before you do that and make sure that everything's equalized. So that's the old stock car, the 1976 Chevrolet Opala. Not for the faint of heart, but most definitely one of the most interesting cars to drive in AMS2. If you get a league together that are committed to learning how to drive this thing, I imagine you could possibly have a lot of fun. On the other hand, if you see a public lobby, or if your league organizer just wants to try something new that no one's driven before, let's just say it could get interesting. Coming up, one of the most heavily anticipated builds, or at least in my circles, or at least the circle around my sim rig, and that would be the Formula V, where I discovered a technique that will turn the car around for you. Until then, thanks for watching, and take care.